Hi guys, welcome back to another exciting video, so sit back, relax, and let's get started. Ever since Midoriya Izuku was a little child, he had always dreamed of becoming a hero, just like All Might. However, that all changed when he was diagnosed quirkless. His friends turned on him. Teachers and other adults would outright ignore him or be rude to him. Heroes and police officers didn't even look at him, not even Kaken. His best friend stayed with him. The only one who stuck with him from the beginning was his mother, his father having abandoned them at his birth. The worst, however, was that they were thrown out of their apartment they were given a week before they had to be out of there. Inko, doing her best to find a place as soon as she could, found out about a more secluded area, far from Musutafu, in which housing is provided for free, including electricity and water, which was localized. This area is known as the Crimson Valley, or just the Valley for short. When Inko and Izuku moved into the valley, they noticed it was very different from other places they knew. The houses were all quite run down, but still livable, with only a few shops dotted around, but still enough to ensure the need of resources and food, and, the biggest change, there are no police stations nor hero agencies in sight. Another big change was that there are no public transports nor any privately owned vehicles, meaning that the family of two walked down the streets to their assigned new home. However, there were those odd, identical, smaller houses every now and then that had a huge sign saying port terminals on them. They got their keys from a member of the governing family, as they had introduced themselves, and were quick to settle into their new home. During their first weeks, a certain realization became clearer to them. The Crimson Valley is the place outcasts of society live in. It gave them a stable home, a place to feel safe at, away from those who rejected them. The Midoriyas found themselves fitting right in. However, there were no heroes in sight usually. One could see one or two heroes patrolling an area, but in the Crimson Valley, not a single hero could be found. This made the crime rate there very high. However, the crimes committed were usually underground business between villains and criminals, as there was no point for the villains to cause a scene for heroes to find. There was little to no killing of civilians. The difference in percentage of kill rates of civilians between the valley and the outside, as they call it, was 36%. And villains didn't cause any big scenes nor attacks in even the more populated streets. They also figured out that the port terminals were the valley's way of transportation. Port terminal is short for teleportation terminal. Within those small public houses turned terminals were around 5 minutes 15 so-called teleportation pads, or port pads for short. The amount of port pads inside a terminal varies depending on the area around the terminal. One only has to select the desired port terminal to appear in, and then one would be teleported into a free port pad inside the selected terminal. As the years go by, Izuku and his mother became more accustomed to the lifestyle of a Crimson Misfit. Crimson Misfits is what the citizens of the Crimson Valley call themselves. Even though the valley is a huge area and barely populated, the Crimson Misfits are a very close-knit community, with almost everyone knowing everyone else. That also meant that word spreads around very quickly. That is how Inko was able to find a job very quickly, and at the local hospital nonetheless. Even if the hospital is rather run down and the only one in the huge area that is the valley, though Inko doesn't mind. She loves her work, healing others, and it pays decently, so she has no reason to complain. Izuku's views on heroes also shifted as time went by. The longer he lived in the valley, the less he idolized and worshipped heroes. Sure, he would still watch hero fights, if only to analyze the quirks of both the hero and villain. But that still didn't change the fact that he and his mother started taking on the views of a Crimson Misfit when it came to heroes. Heroes were looked down upon after all. Heroes had abandoned the valley for many hundred years now, the resentment only growing with each generation. The only heroes that were at least tolerated were underground heroes, who made an effort of patrolling the valley at night. But then again, not all underground heroes do so. And even those that do, usually patrol there so irregularly that it barely does anything to the crime rate in the valley. The Crimson Valley has its own set of rules and regulations, as the government, and by extension the HPSC, does not care about them. That is something Izuku and his mother learned very quickly. One, petty crimes, like minor theft, will be frowned upon, but tolerated. The reasons must not be known, but usually it is only done if in absolute dire need. Vandalism is also tolerated. There is not a single wall free from graffiti or street art. 2, child neglect, abandonment, or abuse is against the Crimson Valley's codices and will lead to being kicked out of the valley. Your child will be taken from you and taken into the local orphanage. Children's lives are valued more than anything else here. 3, if someone dies, you may mourn the day they die, the day you found out they died, and you will receive half of your pay for that day. Any kind of further mourning, like death anniversary, will have to be private and work cannot be skipped. Taking the day off would result in no pay at all for that day. 4, giving spider lilies to the dead is considered rude and inconsiderate in the valley. Spider lilies mean you are sad that they died. However, there is no connection nor respect to the life they lived, given that many of those who came from the outside to live inside the valley were suicide baited with said lilies. It is not seen as a sign of respect. Instead, giving a crimson rose is more appropriate. as it means you respect them for their hardships in life and wish for them to rest in peace. 5. Praising heroes will give you glares. No one likes heroes nor the police. The only heroes you may praise are underground heroes. But then again, they are only tolerated and very few Crimson Misfits actually respect them. 6. Quirks don't matter. A quirk is a tool, nothing more, nothing less. You yourself decide if you will either use it or just live without ever using it. No one cares about quirks, so leave that out of your judgment of people. Those are just some of the rules and regulations that the Midoriyas learned. Most of the rules are still relatively the same to the rest of Japan. But still, there are more rules that are also very different. Izuku actually loved living in the valley. It was better than when they used to live in Musutafu, and he loves the crimson roses that grow around everywhere. Crimson roses are actually very rare flowers which are now only found in the Crimson Valley, which is also why the area was named the Crimson Valley. Crimson roses are similar to red roses, however, their inner petals are black while the ones further from the center are a crimson red. When Izuku was 7, he met 2 other children while walking through an alleyway. Unlike him, they have lived in the valley since they were born and they knew barely anything about what it is like outside of the valley. These children are Shirakumo Shakayo and Shinsu Hitoshi. Their only source of information about the outside was from Shakayo's older brother, who went to UA as a hero student. At first, Izuku was surprised, a little skeptical as well, when he heard that someone from the valley had decided to go to the top hero school to become a hero of all things. But his confusion was cleared when he found out that they were going for underground heroics. Actually, ever since getting accustomed with life in the valley, Izuku himself had left his dream of becoming a hero like All Might, a limelight hero, instead taking inspiration by the only tolerated and somewhat respected heroes in the valley. He knew underground heroics was something for him, especially without a quirk as an added bonus. He would work unknown by the public, as even till now he hated being the center of attention. Him, Hitoshi, and Shakayo hit it off quite quickly. Thanks to their shared goal, only a few weeks passed and the trio was already the best of friends. Time seemed to slow down for the trio. Not many months after they first met, Shakayo's brother died during his work studies. The news traveled throughout the whole valley, resentment of the heroes and the outside only growing. The trio knew that becoming underground heroes may help the valley, just as much as it could make them become rejects of their own kind, as well as fulfill their dreams. But that would still be many years away until they can actually go and train in a hero school. Since the valley doesn't abide to any of the usual government laws, the trio decided, why not take matters into their own hands? Heroes, for the exception of some undares, never did anything for the valley, and even the underground heroes were not really helping in the long run. Even vigilantes didn't dare come into the valley, mostly because of the rumors of the valley being rotten to the core and entering would be equivalent to a death sentence. That was the day they decided that they would start a group to help the Crimson Misfits and dampen the villain and criminal activity of the valley, and perhaps some of the nearby areas of the outside as well. After all, no rules stopped them from playing the heroes, as the police would put it, if they were present in the valley. Neither were there any rules that prevented them from becoming vigilantes, at least within the valley. And thus, that day, the reigning 3 of the Shadow Misfits were born. Shirakumo Shakayo had always had the same dream as her big brother: become an underground hero to make the valley a better place and make villains regret ever setting foot upon their turf. Both of them steadily believed that if they wanted to make a change within the social standpoint of the valley, they would have to become heroes, no matter how much they resented heroes in general. After all, it was the government and the HPSC that abandoned the valley and caused it to be what it became today. Shakayo and her brother believed that they could only make a change to the system if they were inside of it. The HPSC would never think that someone would try to sabotage and tear them apart from the inside. After all, no, they prided themselves for the power they held over society, and how they could steer the minds and opinions of the public with just a few words. And so, her brother went to UA to go and take the first step to the seemingly impossible goal of changing the system. Shakayo grew up with Hitoshi being her childhood best friend, always attached to another, no matter when or where. With how close they would be to each other, they could be easily mistaken for siblings that knew each other better than anyone else. Then, they met Midoriya Izuku for the first time. She met someone who could relate to her in a way no one else in the valley could, not even Hitoshi after all. Who else would better understand the anatomical difference between quirked and quirkless people than another quirkless person? While everyone in the valley didn't have the best quality lives, most either had quirks that were considered weak, villainous, or useless, which meant Shakayo was the only one to be quirkless within the valley. Even so, quirks are nothing in the valley. Even if you have a powerful quirk, it won't get you far in the valley. As long as you have the qualifications or talents for a job, your quirk doesn't matter. If it helps you on the job, good for you. But if it is not related to it, you are hired anyway. As long as you pass the requirements, you can always find somewhere to work. People know this, and they never underestimated Shakayo and her abilities, since if they didn't have to use their quirks in their day-to-day life, what difference does that make if someone doesn't have a quirk to theoretically use? Either way, even if Shakayo only started out with the group after her brother's death, she had been thinking about it for a very long time together with Hitoshi. After all, heroes barely did anything to help, dare say they didn't do anything at all. And so, when they first discussed the group, it was clear to the two boys that Shakayo would be their leader with both of them as her second in command. Even though Shakayo was the leader, she would always include both of her friends in any decision-making and see them on equal footing after all. If they were to start this group together, then they would lead it together. She never really felt comfortable being the only one calling the shots. The only part now was the recruiting. Having lived in the valley since forever, Shakayo knows every Crimson Misfit by heart. Though that was mostly because it was her family clan that had started and founded the valley, which also means they were in charge of governing and distributing housing. They had picked out a few children around their age, never more than a 1-year gap older and younger to themselves, to go and recruit 5 of them for more important roles. These 5 would be known as the Shadow Misfits Division Captains. Each division has a different focus point and specialties. Even with these divides, they mostly worked in mixed groups when it came to patrolling or the like. Division 1, or named Misfit Force, were the ones who hunt down villains directly and engage in hand-to-hand combat. While they have the strength, and sometimes the quirk, to knock down the villains themselves, they usually also work as the distractions while members of the other divisions would make their move unnoticed, knowing they could definitely not afford to rely on their physical abilities and quirks alone. They made a division solely purposed for working behind the scenes, supporting those on the field. The division that was selected for this is Division 2, called Shadow Support. They are comprised of support engineers and inventors that make the gear for the others to use while out and about on the streets. Sometimes, when another division cannot watch over feeds and play mission control, then one of them would do so, as they never went onto the field themselves. Gaining information is something delicate, and raiding legally unoccupied houses that were taken over by villains as hideouts is even more so. So for these special missions, Division 3, or Misfit Vigilance, is the division that handles most of the stealth work. Misfit Vigilance is all about stealth, infiltration, and spying. They work in tandem with members of Division 4 to swiftly take out villains that those of Division 1 are struggling with and are only distracting. They carry out swift takedowns that focus on the element of surprise, stealthily creeping up to their target and performing a sneak attack to knock them out. Having a division tailored to close combat means that there has to be a division that could handle long-range combat. That is where Division 4 comes in. Division 4, named Shooting Shadow, takes down their targets with either bows or guns, snipers, depending on what they specialize with. Either way, both the bullets and the arrows are special. They don't use anything lethal, as the Shadow Misfits are against killing, especially considering that they are all still children. Everyone from Division 4 is decked out with tranquilizer darts, arrows, or paralyzing bullets, arrows. That way, they ensure that they don't accidentally kill anyone. The last division is Division 5. Also known as Misfit Mind, they are the strategists and planners of the group, while also the one to gather the information and infiltrate together with the other divisions to gain said information. Together with the other divisions, they plan out missions or special operations. Perhaps it's already clear that unlike Shadow Support, they don't stay away from the field, but they usually manage their hideout while the others are at home or on patrol at night. They are always behind the screen, keeping a close eye on their mates on the field, connected via comms. Should backup or any other kind of help be needed, Shakayo, Izuku, and Hitoshi put their minds together, deciding who would be a good fit for their group, considering if they would even consider to join, and sort them to one of the divisions they think would suit them best. Although both Shakayo and Hitoshi were doing most of that work, as they knew more of the other children and more about them than Izuku did. After deciding on all the recruits and recruiting the captains for their different divisions, they got into the recruitment of the other members of each division. In the end, they were 30 members in Shadow Misfits, the founding trio as the reigning 3, 6 members in Misfit Force, 4 in Shadow Support, 6 in Misfit Vigilance, 5 in Shooting Shadow, and another 6 members in Misfit Mind, not wanting to risk their actual identities to come to light. Each one of the Shadow Misfits has a code name, an alias of sorts, to keep the code names simple and to not give away anything too personal. Each and every member was assigned a color, usually close to their hair color or their favorite color. This led to Izuku's alias to be Viridian, Hitoshi's to be Indigo, and Shakayo's being Imperial Eminence. The color of their costume also has the assigned color as an accent, as they were all a very dark gray, almost adjacent to black, with accents of gold in their assigned color. Left is female, right is male. Only difference is the shirt, color-coded accents are the areas in white. Their costumes also all look rather similar, however. The division captains and the reigning 3 all have small details that set them apart from the others. The captains have an extra band of color on their left upper arm, indicating their status as captains. The reigning 3, however, have their shoulder guard on the other shoulder, in contrast to all the other members, and also slightly different costumes, while staying on theme with the others. Shakayo's costume, however, has 2 further accent colors besides gold, imperial purple, and eminent, which is why her alias is a mix of both. It's mostly because 1, she couldn't decide which one she wanted, and 2, to stand out even more from the rest. But she only made that decision on the insistence of the others, that they want their leader to stand out the most amongst them. Besides that, Division 2 has safety goggles on instead of visors. Since they invent and don't actively fight, they spent almost an entire year training and getting to know each other better to be able to go out and on the field. During that time, Division 2, Shadow Support, was making and perfecting their gear and costumes. It all paid off, and soon enough, they were all able to cooperate with each other flawlessly and had a good shift patrol system up and running. With each division having their own focus point and working together flawlessly, they managed to bring down the crime rates of the Crimson Valley by 5% within their first few weeks out and about. The Crimson Misfits soon saw the Shadow Misfits as the protectors of the valley, even though they are considered a vigilante group by the outside's laws. The symbol of the Shadow Misfits could be seen painted on the walls of almost every alley, as well as on the outskirts of the valley. This marked the territory of the Shadow Misfits, and criminals and low-ranking villains soon became fearful of going into the valley. The only valid crimes the Shadow Misfits let through are the petty crimes of the Crimson Misfits, as that is one of the rules of the valley. Shakayo wouldn't want it any other way, nor would the other members. Shinsu Hitoshi's family has been living in the valley ever since his great-grandfather moved there. Due to this, Hitoshi could hardly imagine life outside of the valley, though he would wonder how it is living in the outside. Fortunately, he got to hear little stories of Shakayo's brother and his experiences of the outside. However, he never thought he would one day end up living outside of the valley himself. No, that was wrong kind of. Shakayo's brother lived in the valley. He just went to school outside of the valley. Meanwhile, Hitoshi now lives outside the valley, although that didn't stop him from sneaking out almost every night to the Shadow Misfits hideout and hang out with his friends at daytime after going to middle school. It gave him a constant, something he could fall back to after a long day of school, combating quirk discrimination. Hitoshi still wonders how he got into the situation he is in now. Hitoshi was 10 years old, and it had been 3 years since the founding of the Shadow Misfits, and about 2 years of actively going out and fighting villains and the like. As mentioned before, child abuse was frowned upon and highly disliked. However, that didn't stop people of doing so anyway. Hitoshi's parents were one example of this. For some reason, his parents cared about quirks more than anything else. It was odd to find such people in the valley, especially when they were born in it, since children are taught from early on that a quirk is not everything. It was its own subject in elementary, after all. One night, his parents took things too far. As Hitoshi was ready to leave for the night to the hideout, his parents barged into his room, immediately hitting him. Fortune seemed to be on his side that night, as an underground pro hero happened to be brave enough to patrol the valley and passed by Hitoshi's house. Due to him preparing to leave, his window was wide open, which let out his quiet, strangled cries, and it alarmed the pro hero. Entering from the open window, the hero restrained Hitoshi's parents with their capturing scarf and took Hitoshi in themselves. From that day on, Hitoshi, now known as Hitoshi Shinsu Yamezawa, would be known as the adopted son of the underground pro hero Eraserhead and the Mixlight pro hero Present Mike. While Hitoshi could tolerate Aizawa due to being an underground hero, he still resented Yamada for his status of Mixlight hero. Although, over time, he grew to tolerate and respect both, not just as heroes but also as his new parents, albeit slowly, giving them the nicknames Dad for Aizawa and Pops for Yamada. And while Hitoshi does tolerate Yamada being a Mixlight hero, he could not tolerate Mixlight and Limelight heroes as a whole. His resentment for them, that is rooted deep within his core, just like with all Crimson Misfits, not faltering. But he supposes he can make one exception for his Pops. While he grew to tolerate both of his new parents, he disliked how aware they are of their surroundings. He had tried sneaking out and failed far too many times to be comfortable with. Luckily, when they did manage to notice that he was awake, they thought he woke up due to his insomnia, which was true more often than not. What could be the most annoying, though, was when his dad was out on patrol and Pops decided to stay awake with Hitoshi for as long as his body would allow him to. Once he headed to bed, it was already far too late for Hitoshi to leave, as he wouldn't be able to come back before his dad came back from his patrol. But while it did annoy him to no end, he at least liked that his Pops was making some kind of effort to reach out to him and listen to what he has to say, especially when it comes to his life in the valley. Luckily, most nights were just normal patrol nights and it was rarely needed for all three of the reigning three to be present. But he had been successful enough to get a few nights out to spend in the valley and take care of villains himself. He enjoyed the freedom he feels when patrolling and fighting villains, after all. Even with his new living arrangement, he wouldn't change that for the world. When Aizawa Shouter rescued Shinsu Hitoshi from his abusive household, his views on the Crimson Valley changed. Before, it was just a crime-filled area, neglected by society and the government. Now it was a place full of malice. He steadily believes that those who live in the valley are nothing but bad people. He never believed the rumors about the valley in the past, but seeing it for himself made him rethink that particular choice. For him, seeing how Hitoshi was treated by his family was enough. The neighbors didn't seem to be bothered by it, so it only made him more furious when he thought about that area. How could a child have lived there like that for so long? While he wanted Hitoshi to know his views on the valley, he never voiced them. Who knew what kind of trauma-induced manipulation was done onto him from living there all his life? Aizawa knew that Hitoshi would deny anything he would say and wave them off as mere accusations. Hell, he wasn't even close to Hitoshi even though they adopted him 2 years ago, Hitoshi now being 12. Ever since he had moved into his and his husband's home, Hitoshi seemed distant. Aizawa even noticed the glares and dirty looks Hitoshi gave his husband, though at the time, he only thought Hitoshi didn't trust him yet and was cautious with him over time. The glares and dirty looks subsided, but he still held his distance. Every day after school, Hitoshi would head somewhere unknown to him, only to come back a few hours later, saying he went to meet with his friends. It is not that Aizawa doesn't believe him. It is just that Aizawa knows what the hardships of having a villainous quirk brings, that he is worried that Hitoshi isn't telling them everything. His own quirk is labeled as such, after all. Hitoshi refuses to show his right arm. That is something Aizawa noticed within the first few weeks of having adopted him. Either he would wear a long-sleeved shirt or wear fingerless gloves that go up to his elbow, most of the time even both. And when he chose both, he would only wear a fingerless glove on his right hand, so Aizawa supposes that his suspicions aren't unfounded. When Aizawa first brought it up one dinner, Hitoshi waved him off, saying he had scars on his right arm that he is very conscious about. Aizawa immediately dropped the topic. Whenever they had the radio or TV on and news about heroes were broadcasted, Hitoshi would either turn or walk away from the source and scowl. Did he dislike heroes? Aizawa couldn't bring himself to ask. After all, Hitoshi accepted him and Zashi, albeit after some time, so there must be a reason why he dislikes heroes. Though he couldn't tell for sure if he really did dislike heroes, since Hitoshi did tell them he was planning on becoming a hero. An underground hero, Hitoshi emphasized multiple times. Why he felt the need to do so, Aizawa doesn't know. His motivation to become one is unclear to Aizawa as well, as he refused to talk about that. But Aizawa couldn't deny the sheer determination, dedication, and ambition he could see in Hitoshi's eyes when he told them. That was when Aizawa knew he didn't have to worry about his adoptive son's potential to become a hero, and his motivation to become one would not change the fact his son had potential. Only time will tell what Hitoshi's motivation to become a hero truly is. Many would describe Hatsume as a unique and interesting child, though those close to her would describe her as a crazy and crafty genius. While it is a known fact that her inventions blow up at times, each and every one of her babies, as she insists on calling them, is a unique and powerful masterpiece. After all, it was her grandparents who built and created the port terminals, but it was her who made adjustments on them to make them better. That is why she was chosen to be the captain of Division 2, Aka Shadow Support. It basically meant that she was in charge of all their support gear and their costumes. May immediately jumped at the chance of making gear for, well, could she call them heroes? They are the protectors of the valley. After all, so they can be considered heroes, but of a different kind than that of the outside. The outside has heroics as a profession, which was weird. Thank you very much. Heroics is not something that should be taken advantage of, and May stands by that. Regardless, they call those professional, legal heroes. Pro heroes May supposes that it's short for professional hero. Heroes are marketed far and wide, with merchandise and even popularity rankings to determine their power within hero society. Pretty messed up if you ask her. But who is she to judge the outside? Like most Crimson Misfit children, she has lived in the valley for all of her life. They didn't have heroes or even the police to keep them safe. They don't really have a governing body deciding everything. The hierarchy of the valley is different compared to that of the outside from what she learned about it. Yes, they technically have a governing family, the Shirakumo clan, but that was based on technicality, not on actual facts. The Shirakumo clan is only considered the governing family because they own the entirety of the valley. From their history lessons, she remembers that after a brutal war, even before quirks, the valley was left empty and deserted. The Shirakumo clan bought it directly from the government, who gave it to them without issues. They started with renewing some of the bombed and destroyed houses, before building up parks and other things and then letting people live on, legally, their land. However, the Shirakumo clan does not decide any rules on their own. Perhaps they once did, when the valley was just brand new, and they were the only ones living here. But for many generations now, there has been a committee of volunteering Crimson Misfits that have to be at least of age to participate, that decides on new rules and laws, very different from what she has heard from the outside. But she wouldn't want it any other way. The only thing the committee has no say in is the housing. The Shirakumo clan has all the power to distribute houses, because in the end, everything is their property. But that aside, and the Crimson Misfits themselves being the governing body, everyone has an equal chance at changing the rules, but that only works with the agreement of the others. Their system is perfect, especially for the close-knit community that they are. They had known Shirakumo Shakayo for most of her life, Shira-chan being very well known throughout the whole valley as a child of the Shirakumo clan and as a kind and helpful little girl, who is the little sister of the one who wanted to bring hope back to the valley, but was failed by the outside. Shira-chan had been her friend for only a few years, seeking her out far too many times to give her ideas for new babies. And then, at the age of 8, Shira-chan came to her and told her about a group she was starting, together with 2 other boys, called Shadow Misfits, a group that would fight villains, mostly at night, but occasionally also at daytime. She offered her the spot of captain of Shadow Support, a purely support engineer, inventor-filled division. May didn't hesitate to say yes. That was how she became the captain of Division 2, Rose. On their first official meeting, the reigning 3 first explained the workings of the Shadow Misfits in more detail, before discussing their goals. The first one was something everyone already expected, decreasing the crime rate of the valley, and perhaps the nearby areas, preferably reducing it to 0. The second one came to shock them. Well, not really. They kind of expected it from Shira-chan. Her brother had the same dream after all. Their second goal was to become heroes, underground heroes, that solely patrolled within the valley. But for that, they'd have to go to a hero school, and hero schools only exist in the outside. Furthermore, only heroes taught at such schools, meaning they'd be surrounded by pros the entire time. But with that said, schools outside the valley do better academically. The valley is limited to 2 school districts that go from primary up until high school. There is no college. Add to that the limited knowledge they have from only seeing things of the outside from articles and the like from the internet. Books and other school supplies are limited. That said, 2 school districts are barely enough for the amount of children in the valley, most classes having 20-30 students, some even up to 40. Begrudgingly, everyone agreed that going to a school outside would benefit them not only academically, but also resources-wise. They'd have better gyms to occasionally train in. In the end, everyone agreed that they would all attend UA, but everyone could choose their course themselves. Mei was the first to agree to this idea, but for a different reason than everyone. The Hatsums are a known family line of inventors, her grandparents having been the most influential in the valley. However, she was doing support engineering, which was a little out of her family's expertise. The inventions of support engineers would be used by heroes, after all, so there was no need for support engineering within the valley. But now, with the Shadow Misfits, Mei wanted more knowledge about support gear and how to improve them. Of course, she had been able to use her knowledge in normal engineering to make all of her gadgets for now. But who knows how much she could improve her babies with just a little bit more knowledge on that topic. Since UA not only prided themselves in being a hero school, but also having support and business courses, Mei couldn't pass the chance of attending UA as a support student herself. What Mei is most excited about is that not only are all members of Shadow Support going into the support course, there are some of the other members of the Shadow Misfits who want to go into the support department, due to their quirk being of help in those things or because they do inventing in their free time. From her own survey of seeing who wants to enter which course, 3 other members have stated they want to go for the support course, making them 7 in total. 9 members want to join the business course, 10 members want to join Gen Ed, and 4, including the reigning 3, want to join the hero course. The only one besides the reigning 3 who wants to join the hero course is Tabantha Tataki, or Navy of Shooting Shadow, Division 4. They had already speculated he wanted to join the hero course, since out of all members, he is the most competitive and arrogant. While he probably had the talent to become a hero, Mei doubts he could pass the entrance exam for the hero course. His quirk, Skyward Current, allows him to create wind currents that can make him and those around him fly up. However, the exam will consist of robots. At least that is what UAS website says. And his quirk won't work on robots as they are far too heavy for his wind currents to carry. And in terms of hand-to-hand combat, Tabantha is quite weak when out on the field. Tabantha relies on his quirk to get him to high places to shoot at his targets from above, be it with a sniper or a bow, but since support items and weapons are not allowed in the entrance exam, Tabantha will fail. Of course, Mei wouldn't tell him, so that would not only hurt his ego, but it would also result in Tabantha trying to fight Mei, something Mei would rather avoid. She didn't want to fly. Thank you very much. Well, she would, if it were her own invention. Plus, Mei would rather see Tabantha's ego get crushed by the exams themselves than by her. Being the eldest son of the Nagaha family, Zanlai believes that it is his duty to keep his family, especially his siblings, safe. This is why Zanlai didn't waste any time on accepting the offer of joining the Shadow Misfits, taking on the alias Ruby. Over the years, the valley had become more and more dangerous as more and more villains would just walk around without any care or caution for heroes. While they usually don't directly attack the citizens of the valley, it is not unheard of. Actually, Zanlai noticed how the attacks on Crimson Misfits have been rising, making it more dangerous for anyone to walk around the valley's streets. Zanlai had feared for a while now that the valley would get too dangerous and full of villains that none of the Crimson Misfits could stay one day. While he would never admit it openly, he was glad the Shadow Misfits were established, as it definitely dampened the villain activity in the valley. After all, he had a reputation to keep up. Zanlai is known to be quite competitive, somewhat arrogant, and quite confident in his own abilities. It would seem out of character for him to worry about some villains that roam around their streets for as long as he could remember. Regardless, being in the group had definitely not only its benefits for the Crimson Valley, but it also brought Zanlai excitement and something to keep himself busy with. If he was not hanging out with other Shadow Misfits, he was out on patrol, hunting down villains, either scaring them away with his precise aim or just knocking them out and setting them outside the valley's borders. When thinking of his division, Zanlai couldn't be happier with his teammates. Okay, perhaps he lies a little whenever he says that to himself, but even with the little things he dislikes about them, they are still very good teammates and know their stuff. After all, Division 4, Shooting Shadow, consists of archers and snipers, hence the name Shooting Shadow. The one that was the most problematic teammate for him is Tabantha Tataki. The fault in that is mostly because of their competitive nature, always trying to best the other. It got them into many fights with each other, only to be calmed down by one of the more optimistic members or the reigning three themselves. While both him and Tabantha see each other as rivals due to their competitive nature, Zanlai actually could get along with him surprisingly well, even with their usual arguments. To him, Tabantha is the only one who could understand his hype for battle, and Tabantha is also the only one who could rival his archery marksmanship. The only thing he dislikes about Tabantha is his pride and arrogance towards anyone he sees below himself. Perhaps it's the fact that Zanlai was told that Limelight and Mixlight heroes also act that way, like they are above others, above consequences, and only are heroes for the fame, money, and power, which makes Zanlai dislike him. Though then again, who is he to blame? Tabantha probably didn't know any better and was praised for his marksmanship by his peers in his school. Zanlai digresses. Zanlai still wonders how two seemingly incompatible individuals could be so close. The two he was talking about are Seichino Orami and Binara Nakomi. While Orami is also a little arrogant and rude, like Tabantha, as well as rather cold and dutiful, Nakomi is mischievous, sly, and cunning, but always seems optimistic and carefree. Zanlai is amused by Nakomi's and Orami's dynamic. They seem incompatible, but they are almost always seen together. Add the fact that Nakomi is the only one who manages to melt Orami's frozen heart, makes their unexpected close relationship perfect. But in the end, even with all these different personalities in just one division, Zanlai wouldn't want it any other way. The variety makes it interesting for him, and he really enjoys working together with each one of them. Zanlai is glad to have them as well as the others to rely on to help the Valley and the Crimson Misfits. He doesn't ever regret swearing his loyalty to the reigning three. If anything were to happen to any member of the Shadow Misfits, they can all be sure that Zanlai has their back just like they have his. Higura Mako, the captain of Division 3, Misfit Vigilance, is a level-headed, analytical, and diligent individual. As explained before, Misfit Vigilance focuses on spying, stealth, and reconnaissance missions. Mako herself makes little automatons in her free time and also helps out the Shadow support at times. Her quirk is called coding, which gives her a natural understanding of computer codes and programming, which helps a lot when making her automatons. It's also the reason for her natural love of automatons, but she was chosen as the leader of Misfit Vigilance because of her skills, the automatons she makes being an added bonus. While she is very laid back, she always finishes her missions as soon as possible without rushing them. Mako first met Shirakumo and Shinsu in elementary. They were in the same class and were assigned to sit together. Mako would consider herself close with Shirakumo, but Shinsu mostly kept his distance and would rarely talk to anyone besides Shirakumo. Mako's parents owned their own bakery, so she would almost always bring little pastries for herself and to share with her classmates and friends while snacking on them. She would talk together with Shirakumo and a few other classmates, usually just about what they did in their free time or any new news or rumors that travel around. That's how Mako bonded with most of her classmates. There were those who didn't participate in it, like Shinsu. But that was their loss. Shinsu at least sat quietly beside Shirakumo, listening to his classmates talk while he enjoyed his pastry in silence. So when Mako heard from Shirakumo that they were creating a group to fight villains within the valley, she never expected Shinsu to be the one to suggest her, going so far as suggesting her to be the Division 3's captain. Mako had always wanted to help the valley if she could help it at first. It started with her automatons, making them specialize in certain tasks, like cleaning the house or alerting when someone breaks in. Now, she could help by fighting crime and being a protector of the valley. Long story short, Mako accepted without a doubt, and became known as Smaragdine, Division 3's captain. Out of all her teammates, she is closest to Orikaisha, alias Sapphire. She is analytical and sharp, while also being kind and polite. Other more casuals of the Shadow Misfits usually joke about Ora-chan being the unofficial vice captain of Misfit Vigilance. Mako would never deny it though, because she herself knows that this is the truth. Ora-chan helps her a lot when it comes to making decisions, of course. When someone is chosen to do a mission, everyone assigned on the mission comes up with a plan to complete it. When it comes to simpler spying missions, Mako is tasked with deciding who should carry them out. Luckily, she has Ora-chan to help her out on that decision. Her analytical skills together with her own always ensuring they send out the best suited member of their division to the mission. Mako always had a dislike towards prideful and overdramatic people. Since the Shadow Misfits were filled with many different individuals, there were some who fit that description perfectly, two of which were her own teammates. Mikosa Sam and Mikosa Valencia are twins, who are both part of her division, and because of that, her responsibility. The Mikosa twins are known to be flirty and teasing, while also being quite popular within their school and having many admirers. Mako felt lucky that they went to the other school district. It's just something about those who are prideful and seem to lack the care of the world that makes Mako uncomfortable. While both Sam and Valencia may be the most troublesome for Mako, she takes pride in being able to at least quell the two to some extent, at least enough for everyone to be able to work together. While Mako has some kind of dislike towards them, she is happy to have them on her team, both having skills needed for their division. The reigning three definitely knew how to determine skills and where they would be needed the most, even if their personalities aren't always the most likable. Hajiya Kanoda is not quite certain what made the reigning three think she deserved the title of Captain of Division 1, Misfit Force, alias Obsidian. Sure, she was one of the more calm, rational and analytical kids their age, but she was also one of the most antisocial kids in the valley, though she guesses that it has something to do with her natural-born leadership. Whenever there was a group project in school, she would be the one leading the group and making sure everyone was included and agreed on what they did. While everyone seems to believe she has what it takes to lead others, she herself doubts her ability. Even with the constant reassurances of the resident Sunshines, Midoriya, Izuku and Sume Cherry, her insecurities and her abilities never disappeared. While Kanoda has a simple quirk called temperature control, it did nothing to enhance her own physical abilities, which Misfit Force was all about. Misfit Force mostly handles direct attacks rather than sneak or ranged attacks like Misfit Vigilance or Shooting Shadow. Her quirk simply allowed her to regulate the temperature around her, making her both a walking aircon and heater. But then again, she is pretty skilled in hand-to-hand combat, as well as attacking with a knife, and her quirk did help, since most can't handle sudden changes in climate, especially extreme ones, exceptions being those with ice or fire quirks due to their natural resistance to either hot or cold, and those of the Shadow Misfits. Their costumes were made to regulate the body temperature. With her quirk in mind, they didn't want anyone to be hurt when she did decide to use her quirk in a fight. Her division members, however, had better quirks for this area, maybe for the exception of one, but that was done on purpose, although, just like her, they only use it when necessary, or to make fighting villains easier. The exception was Shirayuki Kana, the older one of the Shirayuki siblings. Because of this, the Shirayuki siblings insist on being called by their first name when addressing them with their real name and not aliases. She excelled in many-to-hand combat, while integrating unique uses for her quirk, Protection. Protection allows Kana to conjure temporary shields that may only last for a few seconds before disappearing, but with the right timing, Kana can block almost any attack, protecting herself and her teammates from blows. Kanoda has always known Ryuji Kai, having been in the same class as him since primary. Due to this, she knows he is very loyal, diligent, kind and dutiful, while also being polite, very academically gifted and formal. If Kanoda didn't know any better, she would have thought Kai was from a noble family clan, like Shirakumo clan, due to being the founders of the valley, or the Yumaka clan, due to them stemming out of the Shirakumo clan and helping governing the valley with them. But he was not. The Ryuji clan were nothing else but swordsmen in the past, having their own martial art, of which Kai is a master of. She couldn't help but think that he would be a better leader than her. Nevertheless, she would never doubt the decision made by her friend, Shakayo, for making her take the role of Captain of Division 1. Someone else Kanoda has known for most of her life is Tamashi Shirin. Just like with Kai, she had been in the same class as Tamashi since primary. But that is where the similarities end. Kanoda never made an attempt to get to know Tamashi, content with just watching the chaos she created from the sidelines. Kanoda doesn't know where to begin with her personality, but her quirk is interesting. albeit not the strongest, but definitely one of the most unique. Her quirk, Debilitate, allows her to weaken both body and quirk of someone via 2-point touch index and middle finger. This effect stays for a max of 15 minutes before Tamashii has to touch them again. If Kanoda remembers correctly, there is an underground hero that is able to cancel quirks just by looking at them. Tamashi's quirk is weaker in the sense that she cannot cancel their quirks, but it has a greater effect range, only needing a touch to work and being able to also weaken the body of someone. As for her personality, Kanoda has no clue how someone like her had been recruited into the group, but then again, there were quite a few more arrogant and rude kids than she liked, more like she didn't like that at all, in the group. Tamashii is very mischievous, sly, playful, and always optimistic. She is known to pull pranks on everyone, even the reigning three, but from what she heard, pranks dedicated to them were less harmful than those to others, even though the pranks never actually hurt anyone physically, except you could count iced water being poured on someone as physically harmful. Either way, even with her being a prankster, she has been one of the few members that could cheer everyone else up as well as just lighten up the mood every once in a while. From what Kanoda has observed, there are different categories of personalities in the group: those who are calm and collected at all times, those who are arrogant and or competitive, those who are too kind and gentle for their own good, and those who are seemingly emotionless. Of course, there were some odd one out, like Tamashii Shirin, or those who fit into multiple categories, like all of the reigning three, but generally, she could see that there were similar personalities nonetheless, though perhaps that has to do with the typical upbringing in the valley rather than quirks getting praised. Talents and abilities other than a quirk were praised and sought after. That and the environment of the valley were probably two of the most important aspects why certain people had certain personalities, but then again there are those whose personality is also influenced by their quirk. Nonetheless, Kanoda couldn't deny that the Shadow Misfits were the most interesting group of children she has ever seen, and she is quite surprised to see such a mush of personalities being able to work together so perfectly and seemingly flawlessly. This only makes her more happy and proud to be part of Shadow Misfits, as a division captain nonetheless. Everyone in the valley knows that Keitama Nizu wants to become a detective. In the past, he used his detective skills in tracking runaway pets and lost items of Crimson Misfits. Now, usually, Crimson Misfits wouldn't care about a lost item, as it could be replaced easily. But if it was something of sentimental value, something of which worth could not just be replaced of, they would seek out Nizu. So far, none of the commissions he had received had been a challenge for him. With his keen, analytical mind, he can crack any kind of mystery and find any item with even the littlest of hints. Because of this, everyone in the Shadow Misfits believes that the title of Captain of Division 5, Misfit Mind, was fitting for him. Nizu grew up with Kyuku and Nano from the day he was born. Their parents had been good friends and even owned a textile and clothing shop together. Inano-kun always seems to have a calm mind, his calmness never deterring, even in the most chaotic and deadliest situations. That is why Nizu usually asks him for a second opinion when he is stuck trying to piece together tidbits of information. Inano-kun never fails to see aspects Nizu may not have considered at first, helping him in figuring out what the clues mean and what course of action should be taken once that is done. They discuss their findings with the reigning three, and, if needed, choose the best suited members to carry out the mission. Then they only need to call on the selected members and they come up with a plan to finish the job. All in all, Nizu is quite happy with each of his division members, all being able to help him plan and oversee the missions and plans of the other divisions. Living in the valley, Nizu could only imagine how it would be to be part of the police force as a detective at times. He finds himself wondering how the police even operate. However, each time he finds himself stuck with one question: why is it that the police never made an effort to go into the valley and help? Is it about the valley's living condition, or is there another factor playing into the police force's actions? Perhaps when he and the others go to UA, he could go and try get some on-field experience in a police station near UA to figure it out himself. Sume Cherry is an orphan child added to that. She is also the youngest member of the Shadow Misfits. When she was 5, her parents happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time walking through an alleyway. They stumbled upon a group of villains doing business out of retaliation and being used to the rules and laws of the outside. The villains killed her parents. She had always been one of the shy, quiet kids, but losing her parents gave her trust issues. That is, until she met Midoriya Izuku. They met one day while some of the orphanage children had been taken to a park and they played together. Izuku had been very kind and patient with her as they played, which made him the first person Cherry actually trusted after her parents' death. Over time, she grew to be just as kind and humble as he is, keeping her shy and timid tendencies all the while, but that didn't get rid of her trust issues, only lessened them. In school, she was known as an uplifting presence. Having adopted Izuku's optimistic and positive outlook on most things, Izuku was known as the local sunshine in their school. After all, And one day when she was 6, a few months away from her 7th birthday, Izuku sought her out during lunch. He told her that they were looking for other kids to join their group. At first, Cherry was hesitant. Why would they want someone like her, timid and shy, to go out and fight villains? And so, Izuku explained further. He was the one to recommend her to the other two he was making the group with. He remembered her precise aim during any throwing-type sports activity and thought she was a good candidate to be part of Division 4, Shooting Shadow. Izuku was positive that she would fit right in and continued to list off reasons he chose her. But Cherry merely tuned it out. She was lost within her own thoughts. Ever since her parents' death, she felt some kind of hatred towards villains. It hadn't been much. But when she was presented with the opportunity to fight said villains, it made her think. Izuku believed she had the skills needed to hold her own against villains. Well, perhaps together with teammates she wanted to avenge her parents and make sure that no one else suffered from losing their parents like that ever again. There were many other orphans who went through the same thing. One of them also joining Shadow Misfits. Once Izuku stopped talking, Cherry told him she would join, gaining the alias Lime. Out of the other orphans who joined as well, Shiroku Narami is the only one who experienced the same thing she did. Shiroku was 6 when she and her parents were at home and villains decided to rob their house. Shiroku's parents decided to not only disobey the trespassers' demands, but also fight back against them. Seeing as they weren't getting anywhere, the villains set their house ablaze, trapping her parents within the flaming house. Shiroku, however, managed to get out unnoticed by the villains and ran. Shiroku distanced herself from everyone in the orphanage and refused to talk with anyone. Cherry only found out when they joined the group that she had selective mutism. She supposed that Shiroku joined the group to avenge her parents and to stop such things from happening any further, just like her. Cherry is happy she joined the Shadow Misfits. Besides keeping the valley safe, she found closure in being in a close-knit friend group like all of them had more or less become to her. They became her family. Of course, she couldn't always understand everyone and wasn't as close to some as she was with others, but that was natural, right? They were a group of 30 children. After all, a group of children that bonded over their shared goal of wanting to protect the valley and the Crimson Misfits. As shy and socially awkward as she is, she couldn't possibly be close to everyone, but that was fine. She knew everyone well enough to be comfortable working together with them. And that was all she needed when it came to their official work. Vel and Toby remembers when their parents told them that they moved to Japan from Canada, they sought to open up a pharmacy, both being very knowledgeable when it came to herbs and medicine. What they didn't anticipate was the sheer volume of quirk discrimination. Their father had a very weak taser quirk that slightly magnetized his body, and whenever he touched someone with his bare skin, he would accidentally give them a small electric shock. Their mother had a simple 5-point activation quirk that allowed her to change the colors of anything she touches with 5 fingers. The people of the area they decided to move to heavily disliked their weak and useless quirks. Toby's parents immediately searched for a new place within Japan to move to. That was how they came to the valley and opened up their pharmacy. They worked closely together with the hospital, preparing and making medicine that the hospital would use, sold for a slightly reduced price than the one they were sold by to the public. Toby got a mix of their parents' quirks. Their quirk, Paralyzing Touch, allowed them to paralyze anyone they were touching via 5-point activation. The paralyzation only goes up to a maximum of 30 minutes, and they could paralyze up to 10 people at the same time. It didn't really bother them. They usually wore gloves or the like to prevent themselves from accidentally paralyzing anyone. Toby couldn't help but be happy that their parents found out about the valley. It was a great place after all. But Toby couldn't help but be interested in the stories their parents had from the outside, especially from their time in Canada. Toby knew Shirakumo Shakayo and Shinsu Hitoshi. They both were in their school, albeit not in their class. They had seen them multiple times during breaks, so it was surprising for them that one day they approached them. The two told them about the group they were building up to fight villains and protect the valley. They asked them if they wanted to join. Asking why they wanted Toby to join, the two answered truthfully. During sport festivals, Toby was one of the few children to always qualify for the sparring rounds. The sparring rounds were the last event of the sport festivals. After all of the more mediocre sport challenges were over, they were made to have children be ready to protect themselves should they find themselves faced with villains or criminals. Should the need arise, it was necessary, seeing as there are no heroes or police officers to protect them otherwise. While Toby only won once, they always managed to score in the top 5. They excelled in hand-to-hand combat, sometimes using their quirk to get the advantage. After all, everyone is always encouraged on using every advantage they could take, and quirks were no exceptions. There were no rules during the sports festivals that forbade the use of quirks while performing the exercises. Believing in the good of the valley and wanting to do something for the community, they joined and became Ebernian. Samakura Neo grew up in a family who openly let out their resentment of heroes anywhere and at any time. This led to the entirety of the Samakura family to be short-tempered, fierce, and rather rude. Neo is on exception. He mostly ignored other children, knowing he would blow a fuse if he had to stay around other children for longer than needed. Look, Neo knows his anger issues well, which is why he would go into the forest of the park that was nearby his house to just punch trees, letting out his anger and frustration on them rather than on innocent children who definitely didn't deserve it, no matter how annoying they were to him. When he was calm and just needed something to keep his mind busy, he would play around with his quirk. His quirk, mechanical control, allows him to control a mechanical object through his mind by touching it beforehand. The max limit he could hold it for is 3 hours, and depending on how big the object is, he could control a different amount of objects at once. For very big objects or complicated and complex objects, he could only control 1 at a time, while he could hold up to 5 when they are around the size of a tennis ball. Thanks to his friendship with Kyogoro Mako, he had gotten quite a few of her automatons as gifts to use his quirk on if they had a camera. He could see through them when closing his eyes. Otherwise, he can just control everything there is to control on that automatons with simple thoughts. Shinsu Hitoshi, one of the least problematic classmates Neo knew, approached him one day with the goal of recruiting him into the ranks of the Shadow Misfits. Neo only needed to think for a moment before agreeing. His hands were hurting more and more with each tree he would hit, so changing it up to a few villains who deserved to feel his wrath felt like a reasonable change. But then Hitoshi informed him that they were planning on recruiting him as a support unit, who helped with making support gear and such. Hitoshi and apparently the other 2 who he started the group with wanted them to be fully out of the field, but after talking with Hitoshi some more threaten, he decided having 1 member of Shadow Support who also went on field shouldn't be anything to worry about. And so, Samakura Neo became Zafir of Division 2 of the Shadow Misfits. Neo hates Hatsume. While she is a godly inventor, she is so eccentric that he can't stand her. Sure, he respects her as an inventor, but he would rather work alone or with the others of Division 2 if possible. Ever since they started working on the gear of the group, Hatsume had started calling him anger issues. Neo is so done with her, not because she is lying when calling him that. He knows he has anger issues, but because she just keeps on rubbing it in. Neo has far too many instances of him getting riled up by Hatsume for calling him that, only to take it out later that same night on villains. In those nights, all villains he would take on would be BL-dyed and bruised, and he would drag their unconscious bodies over to the outskirts and leave them there for anyone to find. At least the villains deserved getting punched and punished for daring to come into the valley. But oh, how much he would love to give Hatsume just 1 punch, if only to make her stop. Tabantha Tataki comes from a long line of archers. They all may have taken on other jobs to gain money, but it was a tradition that everyone in the Tabantha family learned archery. Ever since he had just started archery when he was still little, everyone around him told him that he had excellent archery marksmanship, and so, that praise went into his head. It caused him to be the most prideful and arrogant person most people knew. So when he first met Nagaha Zanlai and saw his archery skills, he immediately saw him as a threat. How could he possibly compare to his skill? And why was he chosen as the division captain and not himself? It set Tataki on an instant road of jealousy. He would take any moment he could to rile Nagaha up purposefully without harming their work or alerting the reigning 3. But for some reason, Nagaha always shrugs it off, as if it was nothing. Couldn't Nagaha understand that he disliked him, hated him, or is Nagaha just blind to the obvious jealousy Tataki felt towards him? Regardless of what is, Nagaha merely sees him as a rival, nothing more, nothing less. Tataki can't even begin to explain the rage he felt when Nagaha said that for the first time. For some commoner that Nagaha is, he definitely isn't his rival. Someone of a lowly status as him could never even dream of becoming his rival. Tataki destroyed 2 targets that day during training due to the sheer volume of arrows he shot at them. Tataki's pride and ego is the biggest of every Shadow Misfit. The only ones he really respects are those of high-status families. That being said, there are only few of them in the valley, and those who are on equal footing with those who aren't. 2 examples are the Shirakumo clan and the Yumaka clan. But due to the Shirakumo clan's status of legal owners of the valley, he respects them the most, so he was very pleased to hear that the youngest of the Shirakumo clan, Shirakumo Shakayo, is the leader of Shadow Misfits. He doesn't know what he would have done if it were someone else who led them all. Of course, he knows that the reigning 3 lead them all together, but in the end, Shirakumo is the one who stands on the top. Regardless, he does respect the other 2, albeit not as much as Shirakumo. Due to their closeness to their leader, it is the reason why she trusts those 2 boys, after all. So yes, he listens to all of the reigning 3, and mostly only them. But if one of the others ever dared to command him around like nothing, he will have them as his target during his next practice. Yumaka Akihito is the older sibling of the Yumaka siblings. As such, he would be next to inherit his family's business. Since the Yumaka clan stemmed out of the Shirakumo clan, they also held some amount of power over housing. The Yumaka clan has been entrusted the duty of guards of the valley by the Shirakumo clan. As guards of the valley, they merely make sure that the rules of the committee are being followed, and they are the ones to enact punishments. Due to this, he was taught about deception and manipulation. Not only would he face such things all the time, but if he used it himself and played his cards right, he could gain invaluable information, since those who are foolish enough to break the rules and laws of the valley usually never go down without a fight. Every one of the Yumaka family had been taught in self-defense. Both Akihito and his sister have been taught that they were going to be guards one day, in charge of keeping the valley in order. This gave both of them a sense of duty when it came to the protection of the valley. It was why Shirakumo Shakayo wanted them to be members of the Shadow Misfits under the aliases Glaucus and Arctic. Due to what they were taught, they were assigned to Division 5. Misfit Mind. They both excelled at gaining information, and that helped immensely in figuring out where most of the secret villain hideouts were. Akihito relied on his deception and manipulation skills into luring others into a false sense of security, while his sister used her polite and kind manner to make others underestimate her and tell her indirectly what they were planning. Once his sister did that, she would strike them without mercy. Akihito can't help but think that the alias of Arctic really fits his sister more than just being the name of her assigned color when she strikes. It's as unexpected and cold as ice. Akihito was close to Shakayo's brother. He would go to him for advice with his sister, since while both of their sisters were around the same age, he was 10 years older than them, well, 9 years older for Akihito. So he was furious to find out that he died due to a villain attack at the outside. If it were in the valley, he wouldn't have been as furious, but he had a right to be furious at the outside. While they didn't have heroes, the outside did, so what were they doing when he was attacked? What made him rage, though, was the fact that they decided to bury him in a cemetery close to UA High. How could they? Burying him far away from where he lived, too far for his family to go visit his grave. The entire valley mourned his death. Shakayo, being the closest to him as his little sister, had not stopped crying for almost an entire week. She didn't even feel safe enough to be alone for a whole month. Her best friends, Midoriya, Izuku, and Shinsu Hitoshi, did their best to always be by her side. If one couldn't be there, the other one would, but most of the time, both were always with her. It hurt Akihito to see Shakayo in such a state. He also knew that her older brother wouldn't want her to be in such a state, and so he did what he could to help her recover from his death. Akihito knew that her brother had a special head, and he wanted to give her when the Sunset Festival came around. After all, he had asked him to keep it safe for the time being, since he was gone for most days. And so, to honor his wish, Akihito gave Shakayo the headband on the Sunset Festival. Explaining her brother's intention, she broke down crying again. Ever since then, she refused to remove the head, and if she could help it, at least she felt sensible enough to remove it whenever in her Shadow Misfit costume to avoid accidentally breaking it. Besides being close to Shakayo's brother, he was the one who looked the most similar to him out of everyone from the Shirakumo and Yumaka clans, so it took a while until Shakayo was able to look at him without tearing up. He just hoped that going to UA with everyone would give Shakayo the closure she deserved, even after all those years. Unlike her brother, Yumaka Chikori had never needed to learn to be observant. She had always been too observant for someone her age, but that was because of her quirk. Her quirk, Sharp Eye, enhances her situational awareness and allows her to pick apart weaknesses with just a glance. Her brother's, Akihito's quirk, Tranquil Mind, gave him a calm and collected mind in any situation, meaning that he never felt pressured no matter how dangerous the situation may be for him. That is where their differences come from. Akihito learned to use lies and deceptions to get what he wants or needs, while she learned to read between the lines and be more observant than most to obtain information. For that reason, manipulation and deception didn't really help her as much as it did for her brother Chikori. Being a lady of the Yumaka clan, learned to be polite and humble towards anyone. This causes those around her to underestimate her and let their guard down. That is their mistake. While she isn't as two-faced as her brother, Chikori is very determined and has a strong sense of justice. Those who underestimate her would face her wrath for that. After all, you should never judge a book by its cover. Most of the other children that know her usually keep their distance from her. It's not because she seems unapproachable, it's because of her family heritage. Children are taught about the system of the valley at a young age, so that means they all know about the role the Yumaka clan plays. It deprived her of friends she yearned to make, but because of her family heritage, most children are afraid of the retaliation they could get for accidentally hurting her. Luckily, as children grow older, their understanding of the world around them also grows over time. Chikori gained more friends since they realized that, in the end, she is just another person, just like them. And the Yumaka clan did not operate like that. So Chikori is grateful that they matured and grew to understand the difference of their impression of the duties of a guard and the actual duties of a guard. Chikori would always stargaze together with Shakayo. There just was something calming about watching the stars above them, searching for constellations as if they held the answers of the universe. It made them bond a lot. With the Shadow Misfits, however, these stargazing nights got less frequent, but they dedicate the first night of each month to stargaze. Chikori enjoyed those simple moments, alone with one of the people she trusts the most. It allowed her to forget the duties she would one day inevitably gain. But at least she wouldn't be alone anymore. Unlike when she was younger this time around, she had a lot of friends who were willing to help her out if she just said the words. Yet Chikori knew she would be alright as long as she had her friends around her, especially her brother and Shakayo. Unlike his husband, Yamada Hazashi made an active effort in trying to reach out to Hitoshi. While he was blind to see the glares and dirty looks his adopted son threw at him, he did his best to bond with him at first. He always asked him how his time with his friends was after he came back home hours after school had ended. It was only about 2 or 3 years after their initial adoption that Hitoshi had actively held an actual conversation with him that was not mandatory or forced, to say the least. It was a very slow progress, sure, but it was progress nonetheless, right? Either way, their talks would be when Shouta was out on patrol and Hitoshi, having insomnia, couldn't fall asleep yet, so Yamada made an effort to stay up with him and talk to him for as long as he could stay awake. Through that, he found out which topics to avoid and which were safe to go. While he was skeptical about the valley at first due to Shouta's initial rant when he first saved Hitoshi from his parents, he quickly changed his opinion when Hitoshi had told him about his life back in the valley. Hitoshi had told him that while the valley was basically all just houses and alleyways with 2 parks at both the east and west of the valley, most houses were actually unoccupied. Only about a fifth of the houses were actually occupied, leaving most houses empty, which usually resulted in most living in a house surrounded by empty, abandoned houses around them, like Hitoshi's house used to be. Shouta had complained that none of the neighbors seemed to be bothered by the abuse going on in his previous household, but now Yamada knew that there were no neighbors to begin with. Other than that, Hitoshi had actually slipped one rule while explaining why he didn't blame the valley as a whole for what his parents did. To say Yamada was shocked is an understatement. He didn't know that child abuse, neglect and abandonment was soon not on the valley's good side and was even against their codices. If the abuse on Hitoshi was found out by those living in the valley, they would have first lost their job, then their custody of Hitoshi would have gone over to the local orphanage, and lastly they would be thrown out of the valley, forever forbidding them from entering the valley ever again. Hearing Hitoshi explain that made Yamada wonder how much he and Shouta actually knew about the valley, since his husband seems to have a very bad impression of it, though that could just be since they were looking in from the outside and were not actively living nor trying to understand the situation there. Something else he found out about the valley was that they had distrust to the outside, as Hitoshi had taken to calling everything that wasn't the valley. Hitoshi told him that it wasn't always that bad and that there had been someone of the valley who had gone to the hero course of UA in the past, but was killed during his work studies in his second year, which made everyone gain hope for the outside at first, but lose it altogether again, adding to their resentment. For Hazashi, it hit close to home after all. One of his own best friends was killed during their work study during their second year. Hitoshi admitted to knowing them personally due to his childhood best friend being their younger sister. This just hurt Hazashi more. He didn't know if his friend had any younger siblings, but from the tone of Hitoshi's voice, he saw his best friend's brother as his own brother too. It must hurt knowing that someone in your family died as they were building up hope for their family before they could even bring that hope back home. When Hazashi asked for the names of his best friend as well as her brother, Hitoshi skeptically looked at him after a moment of silence. He simply told him that he wouldn't answer that and he would probably find out in the future himself rather than having Hitoshi telling him. He also added that he was surprised that he didn't know who he was talking about as it was on the news, which was the reason the people of the valley knew what happened. Actually, they had only gone onto the news of the outside world during the time of this individual being in UA and only watched news related to UA after their death. Everything went back to how it was, only watching local news instead of that from the outside. Hazashi couldn't help but wonder how the valley truly was. Yes, it was quite the rundown area and villains lurked in every corner due to little to no hero activity. But hearing Hitoshi speak of the valley so fondly, he couldn't help but think about all assumptions him and mostly Shouta had about that place. After all, if he had already been surprised twice by how different they actually were than they had initially thought, who is to say that it wasn't the case for everything else they knew or thought they know about that place? Perhaps one day he should tell Shouta about his discoveries about the valley. But for now, he promised Hitoshi these late-night talks would stay only between the two of them. Orami Sicino never thought she would join a group of children that would protect the valley. If you had told her, she would have given you a scoff before turning away and leaving you behind. After all, why would children feel the need to do something to protect the valley? Wasn't that the job of the adults? In the end, she never really got her answer. She felt disappointed in the adults of the Crimson Valley. They didn't even notice the increase of villain activity. It took a group of children to resolve the crisis and make them realize just how close they were from a point of no turning back. They managed to bring down the crime rate significantly while they were out and about. Sicino had always believed that some of the abandoned houses were secret hideouts of villains, but she never would have guessed just how many were being used as such. Only a fifth of houses were actually occupied by Crimson Misfits, but around 3/10 of houses were taken over by villains. How had it gotten so bad? Thankfully, as they were getting recognized by the Crimson Misfits as their protectors and their insignia was painted on everywhere, villains who knew better avoided the valley. But there will always be those who are foolish enough to try and set up base in the valley. Some get clever, saying they were here in search of shelter and for a new place to live, but Cichino never bought it in the end. She would end up being right with her suspicions and they were quickly taken care of. That is mostly thanks to her quirk when looking at someone. She can force others to speak nothing but the truth and only the truth. They also feel compelled to answer any question she asks them, hence why her quirk is called Truthful Gaze. Upon activation, her pupils glow because of her quirk. Her pupils are shaped as an X. Unlike most quirks that rely on sight, she doesn't have to fear her quirk deactivating. When she blinks, it will remain active as long as she looks at her target and her pupils glow. Either way, her quirk gives her trust issues understandable, as it is a truth-telling quirk after all. Cichino, also known under the alias of Raven, is a skilled sniper and part of Division 4. But most of the time, she throws marbles at her targets hard enough to knock them out when they hit the right points. Oh, but she loves the thrill she feels when laying on the roof of a house, watching her prey through the scope and hitting her target in one try, especially when they are running away from another member. One hit and they're knocked out. Of course, she had nothing lethal, just like all the other members. Between paralyzing bullets and tranquilizing darts, she preferred the tranquilizing darts. She even had shadow support make her special marbles that were filled with sleeping gas. Should she be forced to fight close ranged with villains, she would just throw those marbles onto the ground, making them explode and release their content. Thanks to the masks that came with their costume, they didn't need to worry about breathing in any kind of gas or smoke when fighting. If only she could persuade Hatsume to stop recommending her a flamethrower. Sometimes, Cichino can't help but regret having joined the Shadow Misfits. Some of the members were far too rowdy and loud for her liking. But whenever she has her doubts, Nakomi Binara would cheer her up, reminding her that she is doing this for the greater good of the valley, and as such, is guaranteeing a better future for future generations to come. That is usually enough to calm her thoughts down, but whenever Tamashi Shirin decides to pull a prank on her, she can't help but feel like she made a mistake. Cichino was that little prankster's main target. After all, Tamashi got her entertainment by watching Cichino getting riled up. Luckily for her, Binara was never far from Cichino and always calmed her down again. But one day, Cichino swore to herself Tamashi wouldn't be lucky enough that Binara was there to stop her from giving her a deserved punch in the face. Seemingly oblivious to the world around her, Nakomi Binara is someone who most people underestimate. Don't be fooled, as behind her oblivious facade lies a mischievous and manipulative mastermind. She uses her looks to appear innocent and weak, but in truth, she is anything but. She is prone to lie, but that is a habit she got from her quirk, Twisted Truth. Her quirk allows her to make any statement ring true when it's false and vice versa to lie detectors, and even lie detecting quirks using her quirk on herself. She can control it just by thinking of what she wants, and for others, she has to concentrate on said person. She never really trained her body in self-defense, but she did train herself in using a handgun and rifle. It still surprises her how easy it was to obtain them. As long as you are a citizen of the valley, you have no problem just buying them. Some families have even dedicated themselves to selling weapons to other Crimson Misfits and have been for many generations. After all, if there is no one to protect the civilians themselves have to adapt to protect themselves. But that didn't mean that they were all capable of fighting or using weapons. Only around 45% know self-defense. 30% of those are proficient fighters, but only 15% had weapons, and from those 15%, less than 4% knew how to use them proficiently enough to actively carry them around for safety. So if you ask Binara, the valley used to be doomed to fall to villains used to. With the Shadow Misfits actively training to beat villains and protect the valley, the crisis has been averted. Binara wouldn't deny the satisfaction of shooting her targets. She had always wondered how it would feel like shooting an actual person. Now she did it every night she was scheduled out on patrol. And the people she shot always deserved it. But she can't help but think that it would be even more satisfactory to do lethal strikes with actual bullets instead of paralyzers or tranquilizers. Many still ask themselves how Binara and Orami Cichino got so close. A manipulative girl prone to lying and a cold and rude girl with trust issues and a truth-telling quirk. For some odd reason, even with their seemingly incompatibility, they are known as one of the closest pair of friends of the Shadow Misfits. When asked, Cichino would always say that Binara has a calming aura to her, even with her lying tendencies. It was somewhat true. Binara always was the one to calm her down should she get angry or annoyed. She had to do that a lot with the more eccentric and energetic individuals of the group, annoying the hell out of her soon enough. Those individuals knew to just call Binara, usually under her alias of Magenta, to calm Cichino down and stop her from doing anything stupid. Of course, this never stopped her from pulling her own little pranks on Cichino. It was mildly entertaining to her seeing Cichino getting so worked up over some tiny meaningless pranks and shoved the fault onto Tamashii Shirin she wouldn't correct her. After all, with how much Tamashii pranks everyone, herself included, Tamashii would probably deserve any wrath of the other members. Of course, so long as she doesn't get killed, her pranks, while annoying, never really harm anyone physically. She would not include emotionally nor mentally. Binara remembers that one time Tamashii had pranked Cichino with glitter bombs. Ever since then, Cichino always scans the room when entering, cautious to not step on any tripwire or the like. Or another time, when Tamashii had intended a prank for Tabantha Tataki that was accidentally set off by Cherry. The poor innocent girl walked through the door and was drenched in fake BLD. She had to stop going out for 3 months after that, terrified of BLD. Tamashii apologized for that mishap profusely and stopped pranking her for 6 months and only did little pranks on her after that. At least Tamashii knows the limits of how far she could push it with her pranks. Hajiya Shiro is the twin of Hajiya Kanoda. Unlike his sister, he didn't care about what others thought about him. However, just like his sister, he is very antisocial, but he found peace in making inventions. He usually modified old gaming consoles the Valley had for years and made them into new and improved consoles. His proudest invention is a console that could run old and new games alike. It had many different inserts for different types of games, depending on which console they used to be for. Of course, when thinking about it, one would be afraid it may overheat and fry itself. Shiro thanks his genetics for his quirk that makes it easier for him to see such potential problems. His quirk is simple but useful, just as its name. Thermal vision suggests he can see in thermal vision upon activating his quirk, so he can see if something is overheating and where. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to modify gaming consoles so that they were usable again. The other children in particular loved this. He sold his consoles in an electronics shop and got a good amount of money for his hobby. So, it was a win-win situation. Children had something to play with and he got money for it. One can imagine already just by his hobby in which division he was recruited into. Shinsu Hitoshi owned many of his altered consoles while he himself wouldn't have enough money to get them himself. Sure, Kumo Shakayo usually bought them for him. Either way, point is, both of them were and still are well aware of his talent in inventing, so, just like his twin, he was recruited for the Shadow Misfits. Together with Hatsume and the other members of Division 2, Shiro, alias Onyx, manages to make many different things while he mainly worked with old electronics to modify them to his preference. He also learned from the others how to use scrap metal and the like to make something completely new. As a bigger project, they started modifying a few port pads Hatsume made to make them only react with a key of sorts. They would act as a quick way back into their base, as only the pad and the base had a selection, while those connected to it could only teleport you to that single one inside their base. They managed to limit the port pads to their liking, and the keys that allow the teleportation were made into special medallions that the members had inside their pockets with a medallion in possession. Stepping onto a port pad will immediately teleport you to the base. To not confuse them with the port pads inside of the terminals while talking about them, the Shadow Misfits started calling their own personal pads Shadow Ports. It was a big project for Division 2, but that didn't mean it was the end of it. As the years go by, and the time for them to go to UA was coming closer, they started thinking about making the limit on distance larger. As of right now, the Shadow Ports, and all port pads in general, are able to allow teleportation throughout the entirety of the valley, which had been enough for the past years. To expand the maximum distance that they can travel by, they would have to modify so much more than just some simple controls of which port pads to connect and what could trigger it. The distance was something set within the core of the port pads, meaning if they wanted to have shadow ports near UA, they would have a lot of modifying to do. It was only a few months before the entrance exam when they found the solution by making blueprints and unfinished prototypes to maximize the distance. Only now came the tricky part. How long will it take for them to make an actual working shadow port that used the improved distance prototype they made? The troublemaker of the Shadow Misfits, aka the headache of many of the other members, is Tamashii Shirin, aka Garnet of Division 1. Shirin loves messing with the other members after all. There is nothing better than pranks to lighten up the mood and make everyone forget their problems, even if for just a moment. Of course, Shirin knows her limits and how far she can go with her pranks on certain people. While she likes to scare others from time to time, she refuses to do anything that is related to past trauma or anything that could trigger them. If she did accidentally use something that did end up triggering her target, she would always avoid pranking them for a long amount of time, and avoiding using that kind of prank on them or near them ever again. She especially hated it when a prank hit another person than the intended target. That usually didn't really end well, since she made up plans for pranks according to what she knew about what that person could and could not handle. So when someone else triggers the trap, it could go either really wrong or alright. It was one of the reasons she always made sure to stray clear of Cherry when making pranks that wouldn't be within Cherry's comfort zone and make her panic instead. After the first time she set up a trap not intended for her, she knew Cherry didn't have the best situational awareness to actively avoid the traps Shirin had laid out for others. Her favorite targets are those who get riled up easily and seem to be emotionless. It is why she has Arami Chino as her main target. Arami's default face is a blank stare, but she is quick to anger or annoy, as Shirin quickly found out it was something she took with gratitude. It didn't help that Arami's best friend, Nakomi by Nara, was actually also her partner in crime. When it came to pranks, Nakomi would help her set up pranks at times or even give her ideas on what she could do. Even though Shirin thought she was very calm and nice, she actually was an agent of chaos. Shirin would never admit their partnership openly to anyone, but she knew Nakomi enough to know she wouldn't either. Mikosa Valencia is one of the Mikosa twins together with her brother, Sam. She is part of Division 3, Misfit Vigilance, under the alias of Scarlet. The Mikosa twins are mostly known for their prideful and flirtatious personalities. They flirt with anyone they find even remotely attractive. That can range from personality to looks or even small quirky things about them. It got them into problems more often than not. They both used to flirt with Shirakumo Shakayo and Midoriya Izuku a lot. They loved Midoriya's innocent vibe, while they were attracted by Shirakumo's looks. Just after and during a week of their flirting, both of them decided it was enough. Shirakumo chopped Valencia at the back of her neck, while Sam, arguably the more flirtatious one of the two, was kicked in the balls by Midoriya. Both warned them that the next time they would try anything, they would do worse. That made Sam and her avoid flirting with them altogether and made them vow to always do what they said to not get their wrath. While Valencia and Sam are both big flirts, they also attract a large amount of admirers, both male and female alike. For both, most of the students in their school take the flirting to heart and follow them, hopelessly in love. This, of course, just further boosts their ego and pride. They put up dramatic acts just to mess with their admirers. And when attracting so many admirers, there will always be haters. These other students are usually jealous that the Mikosa twins get all the attention and want that for themselves, or even admirers themselves who haven't gotten any recognition from them. It led to many people trying to attack them, but thanks to their training with the Shadow Misfits, they were always able to defend themselves. Mikosa Sam is the other twin of the Mikosa twins, and goes by the alias of Amaranth. From the two, he is known to be the more flirtatious one. As such, he has more admirers than his sister, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have her fair share of admirers. But even with many admirers, he nor his sister ever pursued an actual relationship with someone. Sam loves his long hair. It has been the cause of many funny situations, as people like to think that he is a girl. The realization that he sees across their face when they notice he is actually a boy is always rewarding. But besides that, he just loves having long hair. And if he can mess with people due to that, even better. During their 1-year anniversary of being out and about in the valley, they decided to have something permanent to connect them together. And so, they decided to get tattoos of the division's logo that they are in. Of course, as little children, getting tattoos is not legal, even at the valley. However, the Mikosa twins have an older cousin that has a quirk called Mark. It allows them to make permanent colored markings on someone's body by touching the targeted person and looking at the design of what the marking should be. Basically, it allows them to make tattoos painless. And so, one afternoon, all of the Shadow Misfits go and meet them at their studio, telling them what they want and got their tattoos. All of them have it on their right lower arm in black. It serves as a constant reminder of what they have done for the valley and what their role is within the Shadow Misfits. While Sam would never admit it out loud, he loves that they would be connected in some way forever, even if they should disband one day. But he doubts that day would come anytime soon. Shiroku Narami is a silent child. She barely speaks to anyone, but she does communicate with others via sign language. She just feels very uncomfortable speaking. Thankfully, the Shadow Misfits are very understanding about that, not only them, but also her classmates at school. But when she initially joined the Shadow Misfits under the Division 3 and gained the alias Marigold, she worried that she would be forced to talk to her teammates to communicate. Fortunately, that was not the case. Everyone knows sign language, thanks to it being a mandatory subject in the curriculum of the Valley. But besides that, she has managed to get comfortable enough around the whole group to talk, even if it is in only a few words. Her costume also accommodates her reluctance to talk. She has special buttons hidden on her mask, which when pressed, give certain signals to the base. For example, one button is a distress button for when she should require backup. Another button allows her to inform the others that she is moving towards someone when somebody else requests backup. Either way, it really is very kind and accommodating for Narami, even though they didn't have to do that. Of course, Narami can't ever imagine them forcing her to talk, but then again, she didn't really know the others well back then. But now she knows better and is glad they are so accepting of her silence. Besides being selectively mute, her quirk also gives her an ability of silence. Silent Step, just as the name suggests, gives her silent footing because her quirk is second nature to her, that she just unconsciously has always activated. It takes her to concentrate to allow her steps to be heard. It'd lead to her accidentally sneaking up on someone without ever attending to. After all, she is a silent person by default, even without taking her quirk into account. But that just made the other members of the Shadow Misfits rely on noticing presences of people around them, even if they were hiding it. It is definitely a valuable skill to have, especially since there had been villains who tried sneaking up on them, but fortunately, they managed to notice their presence and take down the villain instead. So Narami supposes that her habit has had its benefits for the group. After all, it was good training and proved valuable on the field. Shiryuki Lana was surprised when the daughter of the Shirakumo clan had approached her and her older sister and asked them to join a group called Shadow Misfits. Shirakumo Shakayo gave them a short explanation of what it was. And sure enough, Lana's older sister, Kana, agreed. Lana, though, hesitated, asking what kind of role she would play within their ranks. She believes that was the right thing to ask, as Shirakumo smiled at her, and so Shirakumo explained to them how Lana would join Shadow Support while Kana would join Misfit Force. Lana used to be worried Shirakumo wanted her to be part of their inventing and engineering team. She barely had any knowledge about that kind of stuff. How could she help 3 other children with a mountain of knowledge about it? But soon she realized, engineering and inventing isn't as hard as she thought it would be. It was basically just bringing ideas into reality. Kind of like her quirk actually. Her quirk is really helpful with it being able to display her thoughts into the real world as if they were floating holograms. Really helped visualize the dimensions of projects and how they should look like. Now it sounds very obvious when she thinks about it. Her quirk is called visual. After all, visualizing ideas for everyone to see so that they have a better idea of what they're working with really is helpful. And so, she became quite a valuable asset as Aqua for Shadow Support. How Shirakumo manages to do her clan duties while also juggling school and the Shadow Misfits is beyond Lana. Ever since her 12th birthday, Shirakumo was handed the responsibility of organizing the Valley's festivals as well as being the public figure during said festivals. It was a responsibility that used to be her aunt's, but it would only be a couple more years until she would be unable to do those duties anymore. It has always been a tradition of the Shirakumo clan to give over responsibilities and duties over to children once they turn 12 when someone else of the family is getting too old. Not necessarily that old that they can't do anything anymore, but usually a few years in advance if they can help it. Of course, if there aren't any duties to give over, they are lucky until they do get hit with the responsibilities at an older age. Either way, one of the responsibilities Shirakumo got was leading the festival activities and holding speeches during the festivals. And Shirakumo's speeches are something Lana never thought about it before, but the festival speeches really bring to light just what kind of natural talent she has in leading and giving good morale for those following her. It was something she had already noticed during meetings and training, especially when they were only starting out and had their training year, but Lana never paid any mind to it. But Lana could never ignore the hurt in Shirakumo's eyes when she was holding some of her speeches. Lana could understand that after all, their festivals are not necessarily the Lana can't find the right words to explain it. They were amazing and were dedicated to some of the main values of the Valley, being connected to the codices, but that didn't mean they were necessarily happy. The festivals that are unique to them and them only are the Blossom Festival, the Harvesting Festival, and the Sunset Festival. Out of all 3 of them, the Blossom Festival is the most positive festival. The Sunset Festival is not really positive, but not entirely negative either, so Lana supposes it's rather neutral. It's also known to be the opposite of the Blossom Festival. It's the Harvesting Festival that is not the nicest, not in a way that it isn't enjoyable. The Harvesting Festival is probably their most honored and sacred traditions of all. Lana would even argue that it is her favorite festival of all. It's just that the subject of the festival is not the happiest. But even so, it's not what Lana believes is the reason for Shirakumo's pain. Hell, Lana knows she enjoys organizing the festivals and loves doing the traditions as well. As she said, the festivals are dedicated to the main values of the Valley. Lana guesses that those values that remind Shirakumo of her brother. It's never easy to lose a family member after all. And yes, Lana knows the rules when it comes to mourning, but that doesn't mean that the pain just goes away after one day. Everyone knows that very well. Most people take it easy on their job or school. For children, after their one-day leave for mourning, it's basic decency in the Valley to let them take it easy after losing someone. The one-day leave for mourning is a rule due to other reasons, not because they believe that would make them handle the pain more easily. Some of their values do honor that fact. After all, which ones of their values are the festivals for? Well, for that, one would have to attend one themselves. Most people would never guess Shiryuki Kana, also known as Pearl to the group, was even related to her 1-year younger sister, Lana. While Kana got the dark skin of their mother and the white hair of their father, Lana was the complete opposite and inherited their father's light skin and their mother's brown hair. Besides that, they also had very differing personalities, whereas Lana is very kind and somewhat soft-spoken, Kana is rude and arrogant. Some in the group would argue she was one of the rudest of the bunch, not that Kana disagreed. Kana is well aware of her temperament and pride. She never takes it well being commanded around by others, which is why she is grateful that for missions, everyone involved has a say on how they handle it. It definitely made sure that everyone was at least happy with their part while also ensuring they knew what to do. Of course, Misfit Mind or the reigning three are usually the ones choosing who would go to which mission, and a member of Misfit Mind is always assigned to the chosen team to not only oversee the mission but also make sure that all known information is taken into account. But that doesn't mean she always liked others butting into her suggestions, to be honest. If she had it her way, she would just beat any villain she comes across into a BLDY pulp. She knows her strength. Thank you very much. She only relies on her quirk to keep her from getting harmed herself or saving others from unnecessary harm. So Kana can safely say she knows what she is doing. Even without those nerds of Misfit Mind to help out, it also means she would rather do missions on her own. But that is not allowed within the Shadow Misfits. Missions always have to be conducted in a group of a minimum of 3 and 2 backups stationed at the base. At least it means that if something should go wrong, there are others around you to help, and if more assistance is needed, others are ready to jump in as well. Doesn't mean that Kana has to like that though. Kana would never admit it aloud, but she cares for her little sister. It's not really known to others, but Kana is really close to Lana behind closed doors. The reason she usually keeps away from her sister when with others is because she doesn't want others to see her main weakness, her sister. It's why she agreed to being a part of the group so easily. While many would assume it is because she could beat up villains at night, which, in fact, is partially correct, she did it so she could keep her sister safe. She would never voice the relief she felt when Shirakumo Shakayo said Lana would join their support group that never leaves for on-field things. She can't imagine Lana fighting criminals or villains of any kind. Lana never learned how to fight, and she had even told her that she never wants to fight anyone, so being in shadow support allows her sister to assist the valley without getting into fights herself. But never let anyone know of her soft spot for her sister, or else you'll never see the light of day again. It is a well-known fact that Ryuji Kai comes from a family of swordsmen. The Ryuji family used to be close friends with the Shirakumo family clan, meaning they were some of the first to move into the valley. In fact, they helped source some of the materials used to repair the valley after they bought it from the government after a war. When quirks first showed up, the world was knocked off its course. People began fearing those with quirks, leading to discrimination against the quirk. The Shirakumo clan, always having been a kind and righteous family, allowed quirked people to seek refuge within the safe walls of the valley. After all, the old journals of the Shirakumo clan that are the main source of information of the history books of the valley do say that the Shirakumo clan wanted to build up the valley anew to allow those oppressed and cast out by society to have a new and safe home to belong to. With the appearance of quirks, the first Great Quirk War dawned on human society. Many families who knew how to fight banded together and became known as the first protectors of the valley. One of those families is Kai's. Banded together, they managed to fend off any threat looming outside. Of course, that safety came at a price. Many fighters fell, losing their lives to desperate and hateful people. Since then, the Ryuji family had decided to pass down their swordsmanship, if not only to preserve it through time, but also to be always ready should any threats befall the valley once more. They were not unjust to do so. Only a generation or two after the first Quirk War, the second one came. The Ryuji family once again stepped up with other family, fighting for their lives to protect those who lived within the walls of the valley. Luckily, after that war, the valley had been safe from major threat, besides being used by villains, but the Ryuji family continued their tradition of passing down their swordsmanship, being reminded of what his ancestors had once achieved. It was no hard choice to make to join the Shadow Misfits. Kai took the chance and became Azure of Division 1. He is glad to be able to carry the legacy of his ancestors, becoming a protector of the valley, albeit differently than his ancestors. But in the end, they share the same purpose, keeping the valley safe from threat. For years now, Bakugo Katsuki had been confused with his feelings. On one hand, he was happy he didn't have to keep in touch with a quirkless Deku like his childhood friend. But then again, it felt like something was missing. It all began when their quirk status came into their lives. Midoriya Izuku had been diagnosed quirkless, so Katsuki saw him as someone inferior and weak. Then, a week after, the school told everyone that Izuku and his mother had moved away, meaning that the useless little Deku wasn't in the same preschool as him anymore. Katsuki was glad. But as time went on, he missed the presents the little greenie had. None of the other extras were like him, and he could never be replaced. Of course, Katsuki never voiced these thoughts. Being associated to a quirkless Deku shouldn't be something he should have, nor should it be his focus to care about someone useless like Deku, but rather becoming the #1 hero. Even though he did his best to just ignore his thoughts of Izuku, they always came back. Time and again he finds himself thinking how his life would have continued if he still knew Izuku and if he hadn't pushed him away, staying friends. He was certain that Nerd would have come up with multiple strategies for him to utilize his quirk. There was no doubt to that. But even so, Izuku also wanted to become a hero like him. But that was just impossible without a quirk, right? Katsuki knew that Izuku had boundless determination to become a hero, and he knew that if anyone were to become a hero without a quirk, it would be Izuku if he had used his determination and time better. But with the amount of time Katsuki knew Izuku had spent writing in his notebooks, he just saw a weak, quirkless loser who had the delusional dream of becoming a hero. After all, Katsuki had started fights with him so he could build up strength, but the damn nerd was just too stubborn to fight back. So, what did that say about the nerd? He was just some weak crybaby who wanted to be a hero, but wasn't even trying to fight back as he should have if Katsuki had been a real villain. Katsuki believes that the nerd should be happy that it was Katsuki attacking him and not a real damn villain, but then again Katsuki hadn't seen Izuku for so many years now. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years, both of them now being 14 years old, only less than a year away from the entrance exam to UA. If Izuku still stayed the same after all those years, Katsuki was certain he would never become a hero. But if Izuku changed, just as he had changed over the years to someone superior and better than everyone else, then perhaps Izuku had a chance. Hell, Izuku couldn't be the number one. No way in hell, but he could still be a hero, just not as powerful or flashy or popular as he was. Katsuki missed his auntie and Ko and Izuku. When he had asked his mother about if they were ever going to visit the Midoriyas or if they would come over to their place instead, his mother simply frowned, saying Inko had cut off any and all connections she had with anyone in the past. From what Inko told her, she wanted to start anew with Izuku in the new area they lived. As time passed, he grew to regret pushing Izuku away. Yes, he was quirkless, meaning he was weaker than anyone else, but his mind made up for it. And there was no one like Izuku as well. It didn't necessarily matter to him anymore if Izuku was still trying to be a hero or had moved on to be something else. But he just wanted to see that bright smile again that kept him in check and grounded him. Katsuki promised to himself that if he was to ever meet Izuku again, which if Izuku hadn't given up on his dream of going to UA he will, that he would apologize and try to make up with Izuku. Of course, if the nerd hadn't changed his perspective and hadn't changed in terms of strength, Katsuki would gladly knock some sense into him and make him work out. Though don't tell anyone, he said, thought that. Of all members of the Shadow Misfits, Emiko Koko is the only one with a primary mutant quirk. Some of the others have small mutations to their bodies, if only to use their quirks, like Hatsume's quirk is considered a mutant type, but only because it mutated her eyes. Koko's quirk is called Butterfly. It gives her wings and antennas of a butterfly while also turning her skin pink. Basically, she is a humanoid butterfly. It's not that bad. Most of the other mutants of the valley are not in the age group the reigning three had decided to recruit from. Those who were, however, either didn't fit into the profile they had envisioned for the Shadow Misfits, or when they did, they declined and had no intentions of fighting for the valley. But if Koko is honest, she just wants to do her best to help others with her intellect. She was assigned to Division 5, Misfit Mine, under the alias of Taffy. Thanks to her quirk, her sight, taste, and smell is the most evolved of all her senses. But she has a little difficulty hearing, but it's her enhanced senses that gave her the role of watcher and spy of the team. While she mostly relies on her strong sense of smell to identify those around her, she uses her eyes to connect the unique smell of people to one another that way. Should villains decide to abandon their makeshift base made out of an abandoned house, she can easily tell if they were in that house thanks to having the unique smell only connected to that person. Koko can understand why other mutants were so reluctant to join. Their distinctive mutant features would sell them out immediately to their families, should they ever set sights on them. So Koko is a little glad that her parents died when she was just a baby. Of course, that doesn't mean that she never wondered how it would be, being raised by her parents instead of the orphanage. Thankfully, the caretakers of the orphanage never met her when the Shadow Misfits were out on duty, since they usually stay in the orphanage themselves to make sure that the kids were safe and that none of the kids decided to do anything stupid in the middle of the night. Granted, they only check up on all the rooms once, when all children are sent to sleep, and only walk around the halls from time to time. But they do check any room they did hear any kind of suspicious noise from. So Koko and the other Shadow Misfits of the orphanage are quite lucky that they can sneak out unnoticed. Especially as they grew older, the caretakers saw it less and less fit to monitor them as closely as the younger children of the orphanage. Whenever Koko sees the happy expressions of the younger children, she is glad to have joined the Shadow Misfits to be able to keep these children safe and protected, to be able to smile and be happy like that. Let it be said that Akiru Rin loves animals. In fact, he works as a volunteer at an animal shelter called Helping Pup. Animals are his passion, and there isn't a single thing he wouldn't do to help them. Even during his free time, he can be seen strolling around the valley, taking any and all strays he sees and bringing them to the shelter. It helps that most animals gravitate to him thanks to his body temperature being higher than the average human. It's because of his quirk. Blaze it allows him to set his body on fire. And because of this, it affects body temperature. His skin is also a deep red to accommodate for the flames of his quirk. The most common pets in the valley are snakes. They've been around the valley since even before the town was established. The Shirakumo clan didn't want to harm them, so instead, they've mostly domesticated them. From the history lessons, the venom of the snakes was also used for their weapons during the wars after all. The valley had to rely on any and all recourses they had because of being shut out from the rest of Japan. That said, his family has a puppy they lovingly named Kaori from what he knows. Some of the other shadow misfits also have pets. The Mikosa twins have a parrot named Starlight. Hamakura Hiro has a rabbit named Blanc. Velen Toby has a kitten named Citrus, and Shirakumo Shakayo has a ferret named Cotton. The ferret used to belong to her late brother before he died, so now she was taking care of it in his stead. Rin admires her for persevering even after that death. He knows how hard it was for her. He had seen how reclusive she became for a while. So, he'll do what he can to help her as Carmine of Division 1, all for a better and safer tomorrow for all who live in the valley. If someone wanted to find Kyuku and Nano, one would go to either Nozomi or Shorai Park and follow the sound of a faint flute. When finding him, you'll find him playing tunes on a leaf. If asked about the tunes he plays, he merely answers that it's what he can hear in nature's sounds. And that's all someone needs to know to understand what kind of person he is. Nano is the calmest and most undeterred person anyone will ever meet. He always wears a calm smile that can put even the most agitated and panicked person at ease. He's also one of the only ones who can keep Tamashi Shirin in check, keeping her busy by engaging in random poetry battles to stop her from her pranks. It's also why he gets along with most of the other members. His calm and gentle demeanor makes him easily liked amongst his peers. Not to mention, his unique outlook on things have helped with planning and is the reason for his recruitment as Ivory of Division 5. A person's mind is their sharpest tool, so is the belief in Nano lives by. He spends a lot of his time observing his surroundings, picking it apart piece by piece, learning any and all details he can. It's led to him finding many of the villain hideouts over the years. Besides that, he finds himself on field a lot as well, spying on villains and criminals, stealthily following them and then taking them down. He may not be someone you would peg to like violence. He doesn't, but he will gladly fight for the safety of the valley. When hearing the sound of a flute in the dead of the night, most Crimson Misfits feel at ease by the sound. However, the Shadow Misfits in the area know that it means that there is a villain base that was found nearby, but that Inano is unable to leave unnoticed and use the comms without being heard. It takes only a moment for more Shadow Misfits to come and fight the villains together. It became so much of a normal occurrence that even if it is a planned villain base takedown, the flute is the signal to attack. It's become Inano's thing for whenever he was assigned as the overseer of a takedown mission. The soothing sound of his leaf flute lure even the toughest villains into a false sense of security. It's the perfect setup for an ambush. So, something as simple as a hobby mixed with his quirk is one of many reasons for successful missions of the Shadow Misfit. Orelai Aisha is nothing but dutiful, cautious, and sharp. Truly, if anyone were to say otherwise, everyone who knows her would disagree. As Sapphire of Division 3, she excels in stealth and spying, being the kind of person she is. The other Shadow Misfits have also recognized her as the unofficial second-in-command of Misfit Vigilance. She supposes it's because she is close to her actual captain, Kugura Mako, and how much the other girls sometimes relies on her second opinion on decisions over their division. It's given her a strong sense of responsibility. Her strong sense of responsibility usually makes her keep the prideful trio of her division in check. This, of course, doesn't deter the Mikosa twins at least. Hamakura Hiro is more of a calm, prideful type, so Aisha has no problems with them. It's the constant flirting of the Mikosa twins that will one day drive her over the wall. But there's nothing she can do about their behavior. It's just who they are. She supposes she just has to bear with it. She doesn't know how to feel about the fact that they'll be entering UA, seeing that it's a hero school above else. They'll be surrounded by heroes and heroes in training during all hours they are there. She's at least glad that they don't need licenses to be the protectors of the valley, so she signed up for Gen Ed to be together with the group. The reason the reigning three had asked them all if they wanted to join was simple. After all, the three of them wanted to become licensed heroes to impact hero society and reform how the outside views the valley. And while she doesn't hold the same dream for herself, she'll do what she can to support them. The valley is their home, their town, and it deserved to be treated better than it has been so far. The government sees it simply as the Shirakumo clan's private land. It's why they have invited the representatives of the clan to some hero galas in the past and have a seemingly friendly front towards them. But they won't acknowledge the people other than the Shirakumo clan living in the valley. They don't seem to care for anything else but status and quirks. Prejudice is deeply rooted within their society. So she's glad she has lived in the valley all her life, but still, they have only a limited array of resources because of this seclusion from the rest of society. And while all Crimson Misfits are content with continuing to live like this, they all deserve better than to be viewed as the lesser of all of society. With that, her loyalty lies with her people and with the protectors of the valley, the Shadow Misfits. She knows it will be hard for the reigning three to achieve this, but she hopes and believes that if anyone can do this, they can. So she will tolerate going to UA for 3 years. She would be a fool to say no to a chance to get top academic education after all. Hamakura Hiro is one with a most certainly interesting personality. While they are very prideful of their abilities and skills, they are also quite mellow compared to the other prideful members of the group. They care about the success of the team as a whole, but also their own. It's safe to say that they have been a saving grace to many of Misfit Vigilance's stealth missions. Their quirk, sound nullification, makes it easy for them and their teammates to walk around undetected and enabling them to talk with one another without worrying about a villain overhearing them. Truly, it's a masterful skill of theirs to concentrate enough for their quirk to be active while also being overly keen on observing their surroundings and adapting according to situation. It's for that reason that many believe that Gamboge's pride in themselves is not misplaced. Never tell this anyone. But Hiro truly admires how Shinsu can just go on patrol when he can come to the valley even with the hour of transit to go back and forth. They are so glad that the port terminals enable near instantaneous travel between areas. Really, they don't know what they'd do without them. Though then again, they'll have to deal with that themselves if Shadow Support doesn't finish the advanced models of the Shadow ports in time for the UA entrance exams, and they'll at least be glad if they're done by the time they have their first day of classes. They'd hate to have to travel for so long and possibly see heroes on display left and right. Not to mention, villains aren't afraid to go rampant in public in the outside, and they know that they'll have a hard time to ignore it, not only themselves, but also most of the others. That'd just spell trouble. So no, if they can avoid being arrested for vigilantism in the outside before they can even graduate from UA, they'd gladly have that. But that is all depending on how quick Shadow Support is able to complete those Shadow ports. Hiro will just hope it's soon. Kairai Mizu is the local cook of the group. It's not common for him to cook full meals for the group, but he does make some small snack dishes for everyone so that they can replenish their energy before and or after patrol and missions. He also deeply cares about his teammates' well-being, always accommodating their diets when needed for their quirk, like for example giving Sum Cherry more energy replenishing snacks when she uses her quirk, or a more easily digestible dish for Amiko Coco for her butterfly mutated digestive system. It's given him the nickname of Dad of the Shadow Misfits by some of the others. His demeanor also doesn't do him any favors against that nickname. He's kind and gentle to a fault, but that makes it easy for others to forget why he was chosen to be part of Division 5 as Canary. Like the others of his division, he's analytical. His planning skills are on par with the others of Misfit Mind. Some of the others do get embarrassed for forgetting this fact due to his gentle and humble demeanor. It's easy to underestimate both his mind and his physical strength thanks to his personality. But that doesn't mean he pulls his punches when out on the field, nor does he shy away from planning and performing mission control. He may be a big softy, but he knows when to push through and do what's right. It's a skill that everyone values. Mizu truly cherishes Midoriya Izuku. He remembers the early days when Midori-kun was very nervous and would have a constant stutter in his voice. He's glad that Midori-kun seems to have mostly grown out of that habit, but he knows that even now that the green-haired boy has lots of hidden anxiety. He may be able to push through and command the others with confidence, but Mizu can tell that there are deep-rooted issues that gave him his anxiety and uncertainty in his own abilities. Mizu often overhears Midori-kun's self-doubting mumbles, and it hurts to hear the kind and bright-minded boy talk to himself like that. When it happens, Mizu often makes small portions of katsudon for him when he's on duty in their base. It might not be a lot, but Mizu knows just how much one's favorite dish can lift someone's mood. So if it helps, Mizu will gladly continue giving Midori-kun his mysteriously appearing katsudon. Being the principal of UA had led to Nezu meeting a lot of interesting and peculiar people. One of the most peculiar students he ever had was Shirakumo Aburo, mostly because of where he was coming from. Nezu remembers from his earlier days, just weeks after escaping from that place, that he stumbled upon a very different-looking place with its own unique atmosphere. When he first came into the Crimson Valley, he was perplexed. Yes, he knew humans could be cruel. After all, he had experienced it himself, but arriving in the valley, he saw none of those blinding heroes patrolling the area, nor any boards or merchandise for said heroes. A place fully segregated from the rest of Japan, even from the whole world. The people looked at him for just a moment before turning back to whatever they were doing. Before, no one looked at him as if he was out of the ordinary, only looking at him because he was unfamiliar to them. When he asked around where he could find a place to stay at or possibly rent, he was led to the Shirakumo household and given a house for free. They were even kind enough to explain the Crimson Valley to him and why everything was so different to the outside, as they called it, when Nezu had decided to go and impact hero society. Not only for the benefit of all, but also to help build heroes, protectors, for the valley. He knew he had to leave his first home as there was no way for him to accomplish what he wants in a place where heroes don't exist and the HPSC doesn't look. It hurt, yes, but even though he moved out and reintegrated into the outside, he was and still is a Crimson Misfit at heart. So seeing not only one, but 30 applications from children of the valley, 4 of which are applications into the hero course, he was more than delighted. Looking over each and every application, he finds that of Shirakumo Shakayo, the name of his student's sister, whom he had failed, was one of those going into the hero course. Although the application had requested that she was to be known under the last name Shirami, he didn't think much of it and happily obliged to return the favor to the family that had helped him all those years ago. And while Nezu knew Aizawa and Yamada had adopted a child out of an abusive household, he didn't know their child actually came from the valley. Nezu himself is very disappointed that an abusive household managed to stay undetected within the valley, since they have strict policies regarding child safety and all that. But it was not unexpected. After all, only very few houses are occupied, and more often than not, the houses around your own are unoccupied. The nearest neighbor in a sense would be a block or so away. So while he is happy that a child was taken away from their undetected abusive household, he is certain that Shinsu feels sad and probably robbed of being with others similar to him even if they didn't have the same home situation. They all are still Crimson Misfits and they take care of one another. Perhaps having all of these Crimson Misfits in his school will bring positive change. A change he has been waiting for. Perhaps he should steer their direction and give them some special lessons which will enable all of them to spend time together with their own. Though there was something special that caught his eyes. 2 of the Crimson Misfit students are quirkless and both are trying for heroics. Nezu crackled in his office as he read through the files once more thoroughly. He was certain that if anyone, those Crimson Misfits would be able to turn today's norms and laws on their heads. Perhaps he should send out the rule book of UA to the Crimson Misfit children as well as the irregular rule book regarding overall quirk laws and regulations and all that, since they grew up with different rules. This year, Nezu thinks to himself, will be interesting now to wait to see where all of them would end up.